for Hockey Buzz, Mike, you've been working on your top 25 Leafs prospects. Why don't you tell us about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, this has been the slow part of the year. Anywhere from the early to mid-August to the beginning of September is when I usually will do some sort of writing project. And this year I decided because, with the Leafs organization, with a lot of the previous generation of prospects now on the Leafs, I think, now it's more learning more about the next generation of young players and where they stand in terms of, how they're ranked. So what I did was I touched base with our mutual friend, Gus Katsaros, and Russ Cohen, who we've had on the convo before, and got their feelings on a top 25 ranking. Sent it to them and say, do you give me suggestions of who you think I've rated too high or too low? And they gave me their feedback, and then I did a analysis of every one of the top 25, starting with JD Greenway as the number 25 prospect, going all the way up to number 1, who was Timothy Liljegren. There are probably a few surprises. I know that in other lists that had ranked the prospects, a guy like Dakota Joshua, who some people may have forgotten about, but could have an impact on this team within a year. They left him off the list. He was a 2014 draft pick, but he's a senior at Ohio State. He played in the Final Four, in the Frozen Four last year for Ohio State. He's a big center, 6'3". He's really quick. I don't think he's ever going to be a big scorer in the league, but I think, with the fact that on fourth line center right now, you've got, Freddie Gauthier, Par Lindholm, and Josh Juris. If you have a 23 or 24-year-old guy coming out of 4 years in the NCAA as a finished product, I think that's a pretty and he's a good player. That's a pretty decent prospect, and I had him ranked in 11th, and I think that might actually be a little low because next year he could be the Leafs' fourth line center if they sign him.
Do you find it more rewarding, more interesting, more fun to examine prospects and their potential in an environment that is not so pressure-filled, or where the maximum impact of these young prospects is not immediately required or required ASAP?
It's refreshing that anybody who looks at the Maple Leafs organization and tracks their prospect isn't looked upon as being sort of a kook. Because, back in the day, like you said, like Luke Shen, okay, he was a 5th overall pick, but if you were tracking guys who are picked in the 3rd or 4th round and saying, well, they're going to be in the NHL in a couple of years, people would sort of laugh because that usually didn't happen with the Leafs organization. But in recent history, they've shown an ability to find players in the lower rounds. And, we're going to see, Andreas Janssen is a 7th round pick. They lucked out that, he apparently had an asthmatic condition, and the Swedish scout for the Leafs, Tommy Bergman, discovered that, it had been treated, or he had found out that that it was being medically treated, and they got him in the 7th round. And then all of a sudden, he's a guy who plays like a 2nd round pick, and he was a Swedish Rookie of the Year, Swedish Hockey League Rookie of the Year. So they found a gem there. You got players like Dermott and Jeremy Bracco, who I think will be an NHLer within a couple of years. So they're actually allowing these players to develop. They're not rushing them before they're ready. And I think, Luke Shen is the prototypical example of that, where a kid who played in the NHL at 18 years old, and by 21, it was clear that he had not been properly developed. Now, you never know whether he would have been a better player if he had stayed in junior for an extra year, but more than likely he would have. And I think that's the one positive about this organization. They could have rushed William Nylander to the NHL a few years ago. Instead, they kept him in the AHL for almost a full year and gave him a taste of the NHL. And the same thing with Brown and Hyman and a few other players. And I think that, they're not going to rush Timothy Liljegren if he's ready for the NHL, and he was my top rated prospect. If he's ready for the NHL this year, then he'll play. If they think he's good enough to be a 7th or 8th defenseman, then he's going to play with the Marlies. They're not going to rush their young players. They're going to, use the Detroit Red Wings model of maybe overcooking them a little bit. But that in the end, I think is better because these players step into the NHL ready to run and not struggle.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with guys like Liljegren or any young defenseman who vaults themselves up into into the conversation of being on the NHL roster, because we already have a lot of preconceived notions, but many are relatively ironclad in truth, that the defense has some deficiencies, inefficiencies, some issues that we're expecting to be exposed along the way. And to have these young players step into a defensive storyline that could become a powder keg puts them, one, in a position to maybe, be a hero, be a savior, grow beyond their years as a defenseman and take on a real serious challenge and be rewarded for it, or become a victim of it. And that is something that I hope that the management and the coaching staff are cognizant of and are going to cause them to be protective of these players, considering the potential circumstance ahead, Mike. Another thing I wanted to bring up was a question that came from the YouTube comment section, and it's speculation. Is there going to be a player during this process of training camp leading up towards puck drop in early October that the fan base will get behind and will rally in support of, in hopes that this player makes the teams, a la, a Josh Levo, a Frankie Corrado of the past? We've seen this with other players in years gone by, where they have a good preseason, then all the data comes out to support the kinds of things they do, and there's a real expectation that this player, who's relatively obscure or young, or some might think is a sympathetic figure, should make the team. So if you had to predict, who would that be?
Well, I'll go off the board a little bit, and I had him ranked in my prospect list as well as Mason Marchment. And a couple years ago, if I said Mason Marchment is a future NHLer, I probably would have been, they would have found a straitjacket and sent me out of Rico Coliseum. But Mason Marchment was a key contributor last year to the Marlies' Calder Cup victory. His skating has improved immensely, and one of the concerns about the Leafs, this year and going forward, is they're a very highly skilled team, but there's not a lot of pushback. And I know I'm not saying they need a goon. I'm not saying that they, but they, Roman Polak is gone. Leo Komarov is gone. If things get rough, it's basically, Ron Hainsey, Nazem Kadri, you don't have a lot of pushback. Mason Marchment, he's big. He's quick. He stirs the pot. I think he'd be a prototypical fourth line energy forward. And I don't think he's somebody who is incapable of playing that role. Now, he played a fourth line role with the Marlies, and it wasn't a prototypical fourth line. He played with Adam Brooks and Trevor Moore, and Trevor Moore was one of the leading scorers for the Marlies during the postseason, and Marchment had some key goals as well. So I don't think he's going to make the team out of training camp, but in terms of exciting the fan base in preseason games, he's going to stir the pot, and he'll probably get some people excited. And I think, you could see maybe at the end of the year, or in a situation where they need a little energy on that fourth line, if guys like Levo or Tyler Ennis don't work out, you could see Marchment make his NHL debut. So I think that's a possibility.
The NHL is rough. A team's got to be tough.